The time has finally come to start working on the mixture of mud and straw for the bench on the rocket mass heater. We did get a bear on camera just last night, and so far it looks like maybe Charles was right. Welcome back. We have switched gears from the kitchen to the rocket mass heater project. Actually, Charles has switched gears. I have been putting everything where it belongs in the kitchen. He's been fabricating metal pieces for the door of the stove on the rocket mass heater. This hole that he's cutting in the stove door is actually pretty awesome because it means we're going to be able to watch the flames through a glass window. The smaller holes will be vents that can slide open and closed. We had to buy the plate steel in a real city, but the window frame is being made from angle iron from a bed frame that I picked up on a bulk trash pile. He has all the pieces cut, I believe, and is planning to weld those today. And by the end of today, we are going to be greeting Nancy, who you might have met in a previous episode. Charles's mom is coming in from out of state, and she wants to get her hands dirty with building the bench of the rocket mass heater. If you watched our last episode, you saw how good the kitchen is looking, and you also might be wondering what happened with the bluebird box. The wrens filled it up with sticks and left it there without building a proper nest. The male bluebird came back and investigated and saw that it was filled with sticks, and we have since read that wrens are infamous for building dummy nests. They did this in 2 of our bird boxes, and since they haven't been around in several days and they did not build a proper nest, we are actually cleaning the sticks out, and we're going to let the best bird win. The robins have, as of today, hatched out all 3 of their babies. Let's get everybody caught up to where we're at in this project. A rocket mass heater is a super efficient wood stove with a small burn chamber and a long stove pipe that heats up a large mass to retain heat and release it slowly into the room. In our case, the mass will be a bench made out of cob, which is a lot like adobe, except that the mud is not baked into bricks. Most rocket mass heaters are loaded from the top, but our burn chamber is one of the batch box style, which is loaded from the front like a typical wood stove. I think it's pretty unusual to build this type of structure into a yurt. So Charles also put up a heat shield made of cement board to protect the vinyl walls and ceiling. Another unique thing about our system is that Charles modified the design to integrate it with our radiant floor heat. The radiant floor tubing is made of PEX, and it's going to run right through the bench, which you'll see later in this video. But this isn't a how-to video, so before you try to replicate this project, be sure to check back in after we fire this thing up in the fall and see how well it works. But anyway, when you're building your own home, you tend to run into competing priorities. So we're actually picking this project up where we left off more than a year ago. I'll leave a link to the previous episodes in this series in the video description, along with a link to the designs that we borrowed to build the batch box. Good morning. We are visiting a friend who has a nice pile of dirt, and we're going to load it up and take some home and see if we can make some cob out of it for the rocket mass heater. The time has finally come to start working on the mixture of mud and straw for the bench on the rocket mass heater. And we're all a little bit nervous about it because we have never done this before. We've tried to tie up the radiant floor heat tubing so that it kind of stays in position, and we'll see how well that works. Nancy and I went to the feed store to pick up some straw, and while we were gone, Charles put some of the fill that we had for our cisterns, put it in around the flue pipes. We're going to start mudding around the bricks after we figure out a formula that looks like it will work. So it's not rocket science.
That's what this says. It's not rocket science.
So
just make it to where it's sticky and sculptable, and having straw throughout, evenly dispersed in it.
It doesn't sound too hard.
Nancy was in her element here, and she quickly demonstrated that it wasn't complicated to mix up a sticky and sculptable batch of mud.
But I think that's good. I mean, it's sticky.
You eat it like bread.
Mm-hmm. That's what I've seen other people do.
Then she and Charles got to work wetting the bricks and coating them with mud, while I tried to keep them supplied with fresh batches of it. We were working at a pretty small scale here, so we never did fine-tune our technique. We just sifted one wheelbarrow full of subsoil at a time. That's when the wheelbarrow wasn't being used to bring more fill to surround the stovepipe. And we mixed up each batch of mud by hand on the tarp. It was a slow process, so I was grateful that Charles had thought to include the bricks and fill to make up a big portion of the mass underneath all the labor-intensive layers of cob.
Well, it's slow going, but this is how far we got before our lunch break. We're all exhausted, but we could take this opportunity to ask Charles about how the door is going to work. What you got going on there, Charles?
That's the door. There'll be a gasket behind the door, hinges on the right-hand side, and then I'll haven't really designed it yet, but some kind of a latch. It'll just be that's the frame that still needs to be cut down when we get the glass, but the glass will go in there.
Then we can see the fire.
See the fire. And we have little sliders that can close off the air supply if we want to shut it down.
This one back there too?
Yep.
So the bench is really pretty simple. We're not going to try to put a back on it or arms or anything fancy because the yurt is on a platform and the platform has to support the weight of the entire rocket mass heater. So we don't want it to be any heavier than it needs to be. We've just put the steel barrel back on top of the rocket mass heater to find out where the hole needs to be cut for the pipe to go through. So we're going to let it dry in place, mark the barrel, take it out, cut the hole, paint it black, and put it back there. Good morning and welcome to day 3 of building the cob bench. This has been an all hands on deck, all day long kind of project. So we were pretty tired when we got up this morning, got a bit of a slow start, and as a result, I had a chance to check in on the robins. The 3 babies have their eyes open and the parents are bringing giant mouthfuls of food to get them bigger as fast as possible. We've got some really hot weather coming in the next few days, and we're a little bit worried about how those birds are going to do. But I think the further along they are in their development, the more likely they are to be able to survive the high temperatures. Fingers crossed for those baby robins. So I guess we can talk a little bit more about the dirt itself that we picked up from a friend. It was pretty sticky. We have no idea exactly how much clay is in it, and we did not add sand because it certainly wasn't pure clay. It was some mixture of sand, silt, and clay, and it was sticky enough to work with, so we just used it as is and threw some straw in it. We still need to probably purchase some higher quality clay for the top coat, but I thought I might talk a little bit about what we've learned so far. One thing that we learned is that it doesn't take very much straw for a bench of this size, so we are kicking ourselves for having purchased the bale of straw instead of the bag of chopped straw, which was twice as expensive. $20 instead of $10. It would have been totally worth it to avoid being held up in the middle of the project to chop more straw with a pair of scissors or whatever way you figure out to do it. The mud itself has been easier to work with than we initially imagined. It really isn't rocket science. We've learned that we like it better wetter because the wetter it is, the easier it is to work with. I'm sure that's up to a point, but it's smeared on pretty easy. Well, we worked a much shorter day today, at about 2 hours before lunch and 2 hours after lunch. And we came to a point where the mud really needed to dry before we add any more. But we are almost out of our entire trailer load of dirt. Any other building up is going to have to happen with the top coat clay that we purchase as soon as we can get a hold of it. And our ultimate goal is to get the level of the bench up to approximately chair height so that it would be comfortable to sit on the edge of it. And it looks like we're almost there. This coat of mud is pretty thick, so we'll need to let it dry for a while. And we need to get our hands on some clay for the top coat before we can wrap up this project. But before we end this video, I wanted to share an update on our black bear situation. We've heard from several neighbors who've had their trash raided by bears this spring, and one day I discovered that the manhole cover had been ripped off of our septic leach field. We didn't see it happen, but there's only one creature around here, apart from a bear, that could get that open, and I'm pretty sure they would use a screwdriver. Then we had a bear break into our own trash can, even though it had a lock ring on it. Charles thinks it's because I didn't get the lid on tight enough, so now he's in charge of making sure the lock ring is secure. We did get a bear on camera just last night, and so far it looks like maybe Charles was right. But we're taking this really seriously, and we'll definitely invest in some better equipment if the bear gets into it again.
So we can actually pack this burn chamber full of wood and actually just let it burn and not have any exposed fire out the top. Burns hot in the burn chamber, does a secondary burn in as it comes into the chimney. And then it comes out the chimney and back down. There'll be a barrel over it. And the hot air goes back down the barrel and then out through the flue. It goes through the mass. And it heats all this mass up, so it'll release warmth over time. And then we have radiant floor tubing going through the mass, so as it warms the mass, it'll actually spread that heat throughout our entire floor. So once the entire floor is warmed up, this place ought to be quite comfortable.